There were 6 strangers in my house, and one of them was drinking my whiskey. Not strangers exactly. I knew one of them. I'd seen his truck before, but that almost made it worse, because a stranger, at least, has the excuse of not knowing better. The man leaning back in my leather chair, boots crossed at the ankle, glass raised in my direction like he was welcoming me into my own living room. He knew exactly what he was doing. He just didn't believe I'd do a thing about it. He was wrong. My name is Raymond Coates, 67 years old, born and raised in Houston, Texas, east side of the Ship Channel, back when that neighborhood still smelled like honest work. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city, then 15 more consulting for private firms. I built a career the slow, unglamorous way, showing up before anyone else, staying after everyone left, saying yes to the jobs nobody else wanted. I have one son, Marcus, 33 years old, sharpest mind I've raised outside of his mother's, God rest her. And until 6 months ago, I owned a second property, a 4-bedroom Craftsman on Belmore Lane in Katy, Texas, sitting on a quiet cul-de-sac with mature oaks that turned the whole yard amber in October. I bought that house 9 years ago. It was meant to be an investment. That particular Tuesday afternoon in late September, I was driving out to Katy to do a final walkthrough before listing the property for rent. My property manager, a woman named Gloria Reyes, 22 years in Houston real estate, the kind of woman who sends you documents before you've finished asking the question, had already flagged 2 serious applicants. All I needed was updated photos, a fresh look at the back porch, and a handshake with the listing. 40 minutes on I-10 West, windows down. The kind of September air that Houston finally earns after months of brutal heat, cool and honest and smelling faintly of cut grass. I was in a good mood. I turned onto Belmore Lane at 2:48 inches the afternoon. The street looked the way it always looked, clean, shaded, the kind of suburban quiet that costs money. A dog walker, 3 houses down, a kid on a scooter near the corner. Normal Tuesday. Then I pulled into my driveway, 4 vehicles I did not own. A black Ford F-250 with Louisiana plates parked, crooked against the curb, a silver Tahoe behind it, a red Kia with a cracked windshield and an LSU sticker on the bumper squeezed along the side fence, and a tan Camry I didn't recognize blocking half the front walk. My garage door was open, and from somewhere inside the house, I could hear music. Not party loud, just comfortable. The sound of people who feel no need to keep it down because they feel no need to explain themselves. I sat in my truck with the engine ticking and looked at those 4 vehicles. And I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I thought slowly, deliberately, like a man checking a column of figures twice before he signs his name. Then I recognized the F-250, Terrence Boudreau, my daughter-in-law's father. I'd seen that truck once before, parked in Marcus and Simone's driveway the previous Christmas. I sat with that for exactly 1 breath. Then I got out. I want you to picture this carefully, because I need you to feel what I felt walking through that front door. My living room. Terrence Boudreau in the wingback chair I'd shipped from my mother's house in Beaumont after she passed. His wife Darlene on the sofa, shoes off, feet tucked under her, laughing at something. Their son Devin in the other chair, phone in hand, hadn't looked up once. Devin's girlfriend, whose name I didn't know then and still don't care about now, beside Darlene on the sofa. A man I had never seen in my life, on the love seat wearing a Tulane sweatshirt, and a woman barefoot on my refinished hardwood floors, standing at my kitchen island, working through a charcuterie spread that had absolutely not been in this house that morning. Someone had gone grocery shopping like they'd booked a long weekend. On my kitchen counter, open, already noticeably reduced, a bottle of George T. Stagg bourbon, barrel-proof, that I had been aging in my liquor cabinet for a specific occasion that had not yet arrived. It had arrived now, just not for me. Terrence saw me first. He didn't flinch, didn't sit up, Didn't have the basic human grace to look remotely caught. He looked at me standing in my own doorway, and his face opened into the wide, easy grin of a man welcoming a guest into his home. Arms spread, glass raised. "Raymond, we were wondering when you'd show up." I stood in the doorway and said nothing. I was doing something more useful than talking. I was looking. At the open bourbon, at the barefoot woman on my floors, at Devin, who had still not looked up from his phone, at Darlene, who gave me a small finger wave from the couch like I was a neighbor who'd stopped by unexpectedly, at the charcuterie board, at the Tulane man. Then I looked at Terrence. Terrence. My voice came out completely flat. I didn't plan it that way. It just came out the way water finds level without being asked. "What is going on here?" He waved his hand, the gesture of a man dismissing a mildly amusing concern. "Oh, don't worry about it," he said. "Simone said it was fine. We needed somewhere for the family to pass through. Kids were coming through from Baton Rouge." He gestured around the room like he was presenting it to me. "Beautiful place, Raymond. That backyard is something else." I let that sit for one breath. "Simone said it was fine," I repeated. "It'll be hers eventually anyway." Darlene offered pleasantly from the couch. Reasonably. Like she was commenting on the weather. "Once Marcus inherits. So really, we're basically..." And then Terrence laughed. "I need you to stay right here with me. Because this is the moment." Not Darlene's comment. Not the open stag. Not the barefoot woman. The laugh. Terrence Boudreau's full, genuine, completely unguarded laugh. The laugh of a man who has already done the math, likes the answer, and sees no reason to hide it. The laugh of a man who believes in his bones that whatever Raymond Coates has spent 30 years building is already, in some permanent and settled way, available to the Boudreau family. And that the funniest thing in the room right now is the man standing in the doorway thinking he might actually do something about it. Devin snorted without looking up from his phone. The Tulane man raised my bourbon glass toward me. Like a toast. I let the laughter run its full length. Didn't interrupt. Didn't rush it. Let it go the way you let a man talk until he said enough. Then I walked in. Not fast. Not with heat in my step. I walked the way I walk into every room I've ever owned, like I have all the time in the world and every right in it. All the way to the center of my living room. Stopped there. Looked around. Took one long, slow inventory. The bourbon. The bare feet. The charcuterie. Devin's phone. Terrence's grin. Then I looked at Terrence and spoke quietly enough that every person in that room leaned forward slightly, without realizing they were doing it. "I'm going to say this once," I said. "This is my house. My deed. My name." A pause. Short, clean, deliberate. "I don't know what Simone told you, and I don't know what you told yourselves on the drive from Baton Rouge. But I need every person in this room and every vehicle in my driveway gone before I get back. Terrence." Just his name. Flat and final. As a period. I looked around the room one last time. Let my eyes land on each face, slowly, without rush. The way you look at something you're committing to memory. Then I walked back to my front door, put my hand on the frame, and paused. "Make sure you replace the stag," I said, and I pulled the door shut behind me. Honestly, I want to tell you I felt righteous walking back to my truck. But that's not what I felt. What I felt was the cold, clean, laser-focused clarity that only arrives when someone has pushed you so far past anger that you come out somewhere quieter on the other side. Somewhere more deliberate. Somewhere significantly more dangerous. I wasn't furious. I was decided. I backed out of my driveway at a normal speed, drove 3 blocks down to a Whataburger parking lot, and sat with the engine running, and the AC on and the September afternoon pressing flat and white against the windshield. Then I pulled out my phone and called my son. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad. You at the house?" I need you to answer a question before I explain anything else. A pause. Concern edging in. Okay. Did you give Simone a key to the Katie house? Silence. The kind that lasts too long. Yeah, he said finally. A few months ago. She said she wanted to be able to check on it. Water the plants. If you were out of town for a stretch. I didn't think anything of it. Did you tell her she could give it to anyone else? Of course not. His voice tightened. Dad. What happened? I let out a long breath and told him. When I finished, the silence on the line had a particular quality. The silence of a sharp young man doing math. He doesn't like the answer to. Simone didn't tell me, he said finally. I know she didn't. I'm sorry, Dad. That's the kind of sorry that breaks something in you a little, if you let it. Marcus said it the way a good man says it, not because he did something wrong, but because someone he loves did, and the weight of that lands on him anyway. I've raised a man with a conscience. Even in that moment, sitting in a Whataburger parking lot with 4 strangers' vehicles in my driveway, I felt something like pride. Don't be, I said. You gave your wife a key. That's not a crime. What are you going to do? I'm going to talk to Simone. Good, I said. I'm going to handle the rest. I hung up and called my attorney, Calvin Webb. 23 years in Houston real estate and estate law. The kind of man who hears a story once and doesn't need it repeated. I told him everything. In sequence, while it was still fresh. When I finished, he asked 2 clarifying questions. Then he was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of a man who doesn't know what to say, but the silence of a man building something in his head. How do you want to approach this? He said. Carefully, I said. And completely. Understood, he said. I'll start drafting. That was a Tuesday. I called Gloria Reyes that same afternoon and told her to pause the showings for exactly 1 week. She said, understood. No questions. 22 years in the business. When I drove back through Belmore Lane on my way out of Katy, all 4 vehicles were gone. Garage door closed. Street quiet. They'd left because whatever Terrence Boudreau believed about that property, he wasn't willing to test it against a man who just looked him in the eye in the center of his own living room and used that particular tone of voice. Nobody ever is. 6 days later, I had Sunday dinner with Marcus and Simone. Good food, easy conversation. Marcus talked about a project at work he'd been trying to untangle a systems problem with 3 moving parts and no clean solution. I told him he was closer than he thought. Simone talked about her cousin's new baby, the exhaustion, the joy. I asked good questions. I laughed when something was funny, somewhere between the main course and dessert. Simone mentioned lightly, carefully, the way you mention something you've decided to say, but haven't fully decided how that her family had stopped by the Katie house. I looked up from my plate. Open. Mild. The expression of a man receiving mildly interesting news. Oh yeah? I said. How'd they like the area? She watched my face for a half-second longer than the question required. Looking for the flicker, the tightening, the signal that this conversation had weight. I gave her nothing. They loved it, she said. Good reservoir walking trail nearby, I said. Beautiful this time of year. And I reached for the bread and asked Marcus if he wanted the last roll. He did. I gave it to him. And that was the end of that. What Simone didn't know was that 48 hours before that dinner, Calvin had already begun drafting the legal structure for my Katy property. Not any structure that implied shared access or comfortable future assumption. Something else entirely. Calvin called me 4 days after that Sunday dinner. He had a tone I'd learned to recognize, the one that means something has developed that requires more than one framework simultaneously. Gloria went by the property, he said. Routine walkthrough, I said. She collected the mail while she was there. I set my coffee mug down. It wasn't your mail, Raymond. I already knew where this was going. But I let him finish. 2 magazines. A piece of correspondence from a Louisiana insurance company. A Costco membership renewal. A pause. All addressed to Terrence and Darlene Boudreau. At your address. The September light was doing that late afternoon thing it sometimes does in Houston, going long and amber through the kitchen window, picking out specific details. The grain in the table, the steam off the coffee. How long do you think? Calvin said. Long enough, I said, to get a Costco renewal. The silence that followed was the particular Calvin Webb silence. The one that means he's building something in his head and wants to get it right before he speaks. Raymond, he said finally. That wasn't a spontaneous visit. The food, the comfort of it, the way they were sitting in that house. Those were people who felt like they already lived there. That has implications that go well beyond a bad afternoon. Build the file, I said. Already started, said Calvin. Here is what went into the file. A formal trespassing report filed with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Quiet. No press, no drama, no calls to Marcus or Simone. Just a report dated, time-stamped, in the permanent record. A certified letter sent directly to Terrence and Darlene Boudreau at their home address in Baton Rouge, formally notifying them that the property on Belmore Lane was private property, that their presence had been unauthorized, and that any future entry without written permission from the owner would be pursued as criminal trespass under Texas law. I did not warn Terrence the letter was coming. I did not tell Simone. I did not mention it to Marcus. I sealed it the same way Calvin sealed the envelope. Clean. Complete. Sent. Meanwhile, I called Gloria and told her to move forward. She had her recommendation ready. A young couple, Brandon and Keisha Okafor. Excellent references. On-time payment history at their previous rental, 2 months prepaid. Gloria mentioned that after their second showing, they'd sent her a handwritten thank you note. She brought it up quietly, the way you mention something you don't see anymore. I signed the lease at $3,000 a month. That evening, I stayed on my back porch until the neighborhood went quiet. Made myself a promise not out loud, but the real kind. The kind that lives in a man's chest and doesn't move. Marcus would not be collateral damage in this. Whatever I built next, he would walk away knowing his father had moved for him, not past him. That was the line I would not cross. If you have ever stood in a room where someone counted what was yours before you were gone, before you'd even left the building, you already understand what I was carrying that night. It's not just anger. It's the particular, clarifying coldness of a man who realizes something he built with his hands has already been mentally deposited into someone else's account, and that the person laughing about it has never once in his life built anything worth protecting. I know what that feels like, and I know what it makes a man do. 14 months passed quietly. The Okafors settled into the Katie house. Brandon planted a raised garden bed along the back fence. Lease payments arrived on the first of every month, without exception. And underneath all of that ordinary quiet, something had been growing in my mind since the afternoon I'd watched Terrence Boudreau laugh in my living room. I called Calvin on a Wednesday morning. I want to sell the Katie house, I said. The Calvin Webb pause. Running implications. Checking angles. Outright? He said. Best offer. Clean close. I want it gone. Raymond? That's a significant asset. The asset, I said, isn't the house. The asset is what I do with the proceeds. I heard him set something down on his desk. The sound of a man giving a conversation his full attention. Tell me what you're thinking, he said. So I told him. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then Calvin said, in the careful tone of a man who has practiced law for 26 years and has trained himself never to show surprise, Raymond, that is the most thorough thing you have ever asked me to do. Can you build it? I'll have a framework by end of week. Get started, I said. Here is what Calvin Webb built over the following 2 weeks. I need you to follow every piece of this, because every piece matters. First, the house. Gloria had it listed within 5 days, good photos, honest description, strong asking price. By day 11, she had 4 serious offers. I took the cleanest one, a family from the Woodlands with conventional financing and a 30-day close. I signed the paperwork on a Thursday afternoon. Felt nothing but certainty. The house was gone. Whatever quiet assumption Terence Boudreau had been mentally depositing into his family's future had just been sold to strangers for fair market value. No announcement, no explanation. Just gone. But that was only the beginning. The proceeds went directly into a trust. Not a simple trust, but a specifically, carefully, deliberately constructed trust that Calvin spent the better part of a week drafting with the kind of precision that makes other attorneys uncomfortable. In plain language, here's what it said. Marcus Coates would inherit fully and completely. His father had not diminished him and had never considered it for a single moment. But, and this is the part I need you to hear, the terms included one specific clause, written in clear and unambiguous legal language. If Marcus's spouse wished to have any legal access to, claim on, or benefit from any asset held in the trust, she would first be required to sign a postnuptial agreement drafted by independent counsel, signed voluntarily, properly recorded. Not because I hated Simone. Not because I thought she was a bad person. Because I had watched her father stand in my living room and count money that wasn't his yet. And I had understood in that moment that love without structure is just an open door with a welcome mat for whoever feels entitled enough to walk through it. I was done leaving doors open, but I wasn't finished. Calvin also established a separate legacy fund specifically and exclusively designated for any future grandchildren of Raymond Coates, structured to pass directly to them, bypassing Marcus and Simone entirely if circumstances ever required it. Their education, their opportunities, their start in this world, protected from decisions made above them by people they hadn't chosen and couldn't control. I thought about that fund for a long time after Calvin explained it back to me, about children who don't exist yet, about what it means to build something designed to outlast you by 2 full generations. My wife Evelyn would have understood it immediately. She always thought further ahead than me. Even at the very end, she was thinking further ahead. I told no one. Not Marcus. Not Simone. Not my friend Walter, who called me twice that week and got the same warm, ordinary Raymond Coates on the line both times. I was present at every dinner, consistent on every call, the same man I had always been, because I was. None of this had changed me. It had only confirmed what I already knew about what I'd built and what it deserved. 2 weeks after I signed the sale paperwork, I packed a light bag, drove to Bush Intercontinental, and boarded a flight to New Orleans. Stayed 5 days at a small hotel on Magazine Street in the Garden District. Ate well, walked the streets every morning while the air was still cool and the bougainvillea was doing its thing on the old iron fences. Read 2 books I'd been meaning to get to for 2 years. Slept without an alarm every morning. And I sent postcards, one to Marcus, one to Walter. And this one, I'll be honest, this is the one I enjoyed most addressed to Marcus and Simone's house. A photograph of Jackson Square on the front. A simple note on the back. Taking some time. Back soon. Hope everyone is well. Dad, I want you to think about what that postcard did when Simone held it in her hands. The Katie house had just sold. The man who sold it had said nothing, explained nothing, argued nothing, and was now somewhere in New Orleans sending postcards. No anger, no confrontation, no indication of what was coming or when. Just a man on vacation, at complete peace. That postcard was its own kind of message. And Simone Boudreau Coates, who was considerably sharper than her father, understood it the moment she turned it over. She just didn't know yet how deep it went. I came back from New Orleans on a Sunday evening. Monday morning, I called Marcus. "Hey, Dad, how was the trip?" "Restorative," I said. "Listen, I need to call a family meeting. My place Saturday afternoon. Can you and Simone make it?" A pause. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is better than fine," I said. "I have some things I want everyone to hear together. Directly. At the same time." A pause. "Calvin Webb will be there." The silence on the line had a particular quality. The silence of a sharp young man running variables and arriving at a shape he can't quite name yet. "We'll be there," he said. Saturday arrived the way important days always do, looking exactly like any other day until you're inside it. Clear Houston morning. The air finally carrying that October crispness that the city earns slowly and guards jealously. I was up at 6. Coffee on. The house quiet in the way I've always loved, that particular early morning stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. Calvin arrived at 1 o'clock. 30 minutes. Before anyone else. He came in, set his briefcase on the dining room table, accepted coffee, looked over his documents with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has built something he's proud of. "How do you want to play this?" he said. "Professionally," I said. "Walk them through everything. No editorializing, no drama, just the documents. Exactly as written. And you?" "I'll sit at the end of the table," I said, "and let the paperwork do the talking." Calvin almost smiled. Marcus and Simone arrived at 1:28. Marcus in a flannel shirt, Simone in a light jacket, hair pulled back. Both of them carrying the particular careful energy of people who have spent several days trying to read a situation they don't have quite enough information to fully understand. Simone's eyes went immediately to Calvin's briefcase on the table, then to Calvin, then to me. I smiled, warm, genuine. "Come on in. Sit down." We took our places. Calvin at one end with his documents, me at the other. Marcus and Simone across from each other in the middle. Marcus, with his hands folded on the table, Simone with hers in her lap, very still. "Thank you both for coming," I said. "I asked Calvin here because I've made decisions about my estate, and I want everyone to hear them clearly, directly, and at the same time. No confusion, no second-hand information, no surprises later." I looked at both of them evenly. "Calvin, go ahead." What happened over the next 40 minutes was not a confrontation. It was not a scene. There was no raised voice, no pointed finger, no moment where someone stood up and said something they'd been rehearsing. It was something quieter than all of that, and significantly more permanent. It was a man reading legal documents at a dining room table in Houston, Texas. Calvin started with the sale of the Katy property. Confirmed, completed, closed. Proceeds received in full. He slid the closing statement to the center of the table. Marcus looked at it. Simone looked at it. Neither of them spoke. Then the trust. Calvin walked through it the way he walks through everything, methodically, without rush, in the precise language of a man who understands that clarity is the most powerful thing a legal document can offer. Marcus's inheritance was outlined completely. Full, generous. Not a dollar diminished. His father had not punished him. Across the table, I watched Simone's shoulders drop barely just a fraction. The weight she'd been carrying since the postcard arrived beginning to ease. Then Calvin turned the page and read the clause, word for word. The silence that followed was the most complete silence I have ever heard in my own home. I watched Simone's face move through 3 distinct things in the space of about 4 seconds. First, shock, the genuine, involuntary kind you cannot manufacture and cannot hide. The kind that arrives before the mind has time to arrange itself. Second, recognition, something shifting behind her eyes. A slow arriving understanding that what her father had said in that living room in Katie had not simply been witnessed, had not simply been remembered, had been translated into documents, into legal language, into something sitting on a dining room table that she had not known existed until 30 seconds ago. And third, and this is the one that told me everything I needed to know about Simone, something that looked unmistakably like relief, the raw, complicated, difficult relief of a person who has been carrying something they couldn't name and has just had it named for them out loud by someone else. She looked at me. I held her gaze. No anger, no satisfaction, no score being settled across a table. Just steady, direct eye contact that said, "I see you. I saw this. And I did what I had to do." She looked back down at the table. Marcus had read the clause twice. I could tell by the way his eyes tracked back to the beginning. When he looked up at me, his face had gone through its own quiet rearrangement, not toward anger, not toward defensiveness, but towards something I recognized. The look of a man who has just understood that the game is serious and must be played like it is. Understanding that the clause wasn't punishment. It wasn't an accusation of Simone. It was a wall built around his future by a man who had watched someone else count that future before it was theirs and had decided, without drama and without malice, that it would never be that easy. Marcus understood that his father had just protected him. Calvin turned to the final document. The legacy fund. He explained it plainly, a separate structure, fully funded from the Katie proceeds, designated exclusively for any future grandchildren of Raymond Coates. Their education, their opportunities, their beginning in this world. Structured to bypass Marcus and Simone entirely, if circumstances ever required it. Going directly to the children. Clean. Untouchable. Already waiting for people who didn't exist yet. Simone made a sound. Small. Involuntary. Not a word. Just the sound that escapes when something reaches you somewhere you weren't guarding. She pressed her lips together and looked at the table, and Marcus reached across and put his hand over hers. Right there. Without hesitation. Without looking at me for permission or guidance. Just reached across and covered his wife's hand with his and held it. I looked at my son in that moment and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for months. Whatever conversations were waiting for them in the car on the way home, whatever needed to be said between them in the days ahead, my son was going to be all right. He was strong enough to protect his marriage and understand his father at the same time. He didn't have to choose. I had made sure of that. That was the whole point. Calvin gathered his documents with quiet efficiency, closed his briefcase with a soft, final click, looked at me. I nodded. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and buttoned the middle button of my jacket. Unhurried. The way you button a jacket when something is finished, and you're ready for what comes next. I looked around the table. At Calvin, who had built this with me, and executed it flawlessly. At my son, who had his mother's eyes, and my stubbornness and more quiet strength in him than he'd ever had cause to fully use. At Simone, who was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a single clean word for, complicated, raw, and more honest than anything I'd seen from her since this entire thing began. I spoke slowly. Not because I was choosing words carefully, because true things deserve to be heard at the pace they were meant to travel. I built everything in this family, I said. Every asset, every structure, every dollar, and every document Calvin just walked you through. I built it with my hands and my time and years of my life that I gave willingly, because that's what you do for the people you love. I paused, and I protected it the same way, because that's also what you do. Not to punish, not to control, but because building something and not protecting it isn't love. It's just carelessness wearing a nice face. Then, I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. Now, who wants lunch? Calvin stayed for lunch. Marcus squeezed my shoulder on the way out. That same solid grip at the door that says everything without saying anything. Simone paused on the threshold, turned back, looked at me for just a moment with that same complicated, honest expression. Then she nodded. Small, real, and walked out. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. My friend Walter called at 4. How'd it go? Fine, I said. Fine? That's all I get? It went exactly as it was supposed to, I said. Calvin was excellent. The documents were airtight. Marcus understood everything. And Simone? I walked to the kitchen window, looked out at the Houston afternoon, the old pecan tree in the back, the light going amber through the branches. Simone nodded on the way out. I said, the real kind. Walter was quiet for a moment. And Terrence? When he finds out? Terrence will hear everything through Simone, I said. The sale, the trust, the clause, the legacy fund. He'll sit in his kitchen in Baton Rouge and understand what it all means. I paused. And then he'll think about a man who sold a house, restructured an entire estate, flew to New Orleans, sent postcards, and came home and called a family meeting. All of it without raising his voice once, without making a single threat, without ever once losing his composure. And what will he conclude? Walter said. I set my coffee mug down on the counter. The afternoon light was holding steady through the pecan tree, the kind of October light that doesn't apologize for anything. That the day he walked into my living room and laughed, I said, was the most expensive decision he ever made. The legacy fund is fully established, waiting patiently, the way well-built things always do. The post-nuptial agreement was signed 8 weeks after the family meeting independent counsel, voluntary, properly recorded. Simone signed it herself. Terence Boudreau has not set foot in Houston since. And somewhere in Baton Rouge, a man who once spread his arms wide in someone else's living room and laughed is sitting with his morning coffee, thinking about a family meeting he was never invited to, about documents he will never see, about a legacy fund built for grandchildren whose future he cannot touch. He knows what happened. He just has to live with it every single day. Now, before you go, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment below. Type 1 if you think Raymond handled this exactly right. Type 2 if you think he was too calculated, that he should have confronted Terrence directly. Type 3 if this story hit close to home for you in some way. I want to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Because this community is spread across every time zone and every kind of life. And I think about that every time I sit down to tell one of these stories. And if you have ever had someone count what was yours before you were gone, if you have ever stood in a room and understood that someone's smile had a price tag on it, drop that in the comments too. You don't have to explain it. Just know that I see you. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button and subscribe. These stories take everything I have to tell right. The least I can do is keep telling them. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.